It's a crisis happening in real time that's threatening the livelihoods of dozens of Maine farms. A toxic disaster centered on wastewater sludge tainted with industrial compounds known as PFAS, or forever chemicals. Good evening, everyone. I'm Amanda Hill.
And I'm Pat Callahan. PFAS chemicals permeate our lives. They are called forever chemicals because water and solvents can't break them down. Because of that, they're used to make fast food wrappers grease resistant, make pots and pans non-stick. They're even used in cosmetics. They also make stain-proof fabrics and make firefighter turnout gear waterproof.
So how did PFAS end up in farmland? About 40 years ago, the state arranged to have industrial and household waste that was turned into sludge at wastewater treatment plants trucked to farms across Maine, where the sludge was used as free fertilizer year after year for decades. What the farmers didn't know was that sludge contained high levels of PFAS, which leached into the soil and groundwater, poisoning hundreds of neighboring wells. Lawmakers are now scrambling to try to save farmers from financial ruin, as statewide testing is expected to reveal a much larger scale of contamination.
But for a York County dairy farm considered ground zero for the PFAS crisis, it's a never-ending nightmare. News Center Maine's Vivian Lee has more from Arundel.
Allstead Farms and
Fred Stone and his wife Laura met showing farm animals in high school. The couple took over this historic Stone Ridge farm in the mid-70s, supplying several thousand gallons of milk weekly for Oakhurst Dairy. But the operation hasn't produced any milk in more than 5 years.
we thought we could rectify and salvage the operation. You know, our farm goes back well over 100 years.
In November of 2016, high levels of so-called forever chemicals known as PFAS were discovered in his well, milk, and soil. 2.5 years later, Fred spoke out publicly for the first time, telling us how he was forced to pull thousands of gallons of milk from the shelves. The majority of the farm's Holstein and Brown Swiss cows also had to be put down. Despite buying clean cows and paying for testing and filtration systems, Stone Ridge Farm hasn't recovered from the financial and emotional blow.
Spending hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, my Linda would be more than happy to tell you that, to no avail.
PFAS chemicals were in municipal wastewater sludge, including industrial waste from paper mills. Starting in the early 1980s, Fred and hundreds of other farmers were encouraged to use the sludge as fertilizer to prevent it from ending up in landfills.
We helped the towns out, the towns helped us out.
This is Stone's license to spread sludge, issued by the Department of Environmental Protection back in 1986. It states the leftover waste won't pollute water or cause a health hazard.
This material is safe to use on your farm as a soil amendment.
PFAS doesn't break down in the environment and the human body. Fred and his family, meanwhile, have high levels of the chemicals in their blood. All have health issues doctors can't explain.
I have full-blown Parkinson's where I take the meds and I fall down a lot and everything else. And there's no family history.
Throw them on the sides like this.
130 miles away in rural Waldo County, Scott McCormick recalls watching the demise of Fred's farm on our newscasts.
There's no way that's going to be up here in Jackson, Maine on a dead-end road.
10 years ago, Scott bought 100 acres with dreams of raising hay, produce, and livestock for his family and customers. He also discovered his fields had been treated with sludge for more than a decade. At that time, Scott wasn't worried because of the same promises DEP listed on the farm's sludge permit.
I thought it was safe. I thought it's old farm ground and we're going to restore it.
But his family's world turned upside down in February when their farm was identified as a hot spot for PFAS contamination. Rather than wait on state regulators, the couple tested their drinking water. The results showed PFAS chemicals nearly 70 times above Maine's safe limit. The couple, who have a 7-year-old daughter, also just welcomed a baby girl. State medical officials said the chemicals could pass to the baby through breast milk. But Scott's wife was still encouraged to continue breastfeeding for the health benefits.
She's breastfeeding. The baby's fine. We're fine right now, but we're still scared because no one really knows at what levels is something going to happen.
Lawmakers are taking the first step in providing a safety net of tens of millions of dollars to address the crisis in real time. So far, testing has identified 10 farms with high levels of the chemicals, but that process is expected to take years.
Even though $100 million sounds like a lot of money, we don't totally know the scope of PFAS contamination yet and how many farms will be impacted.
Amanda Beal is the commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. She recently testified in favor of legislation that would set up an advisory committee. Now, that committee is expected to be made up of food producers, farmers, environmental and health experts, and they would allocate funds to cover impacted farmers' health and business costs, expanded testing, research, buy contaminated land, and long-term health monitoring. Scott, meanwhile, is waiting for the results of blood tests he had to pay for, which could run more than $1,000. Samples from his livestock are safe, but additional testing of soil and hay, his primary crop, will take place later this spring. If his fields are found to be contaminated, there are very few options.
I am for solar panels and all that, but not looking out my front door. I just didn't buy this for this.
As for Fred, that help will be too little, too late. The third-generation farmer surviving on government assistance and the generosity of others is stuck with acres of contaminated land no one will touch.
You've taken my value away.
And no price tag is expected to make this farm and his family whole again. In Arundel, Vivian Lee, News Center, Maine.
Governor Janet Mills has proposed $60 million in aid to farmers. The final figure will be released when the supplemental budget is approved within the next couple of weeks.
The state is also working on a short-term income replacement program for farmers with contaminated land, and farm advocacy groups are raising relief funds as well. We have more information on our website and our News Center Maine app.